This is BBC One in the Northwest. Now, Inside Out.
Hello, I'm JC Normand and welcome to Inside Out Northwest.
Tonight, we follow a family to France as they investigate Britain's worst maritime disaster.
It is accepted that more people perished that day than on the combined losses of the Lusitania or even the Titanic. And it is the biggest single disaster in British maritime history.
In June, it'll be 80 years since a Liverpool cruise liner sank off the coast of France, claiming thousands of lives. You may never have heard of the doomed voyage of the Lancastria, a ship whose name is all but forgotten. But it was Britain's worst ever maritime disaster, more deadly than the combined losses of the Titanic and the Lusitania tragedies. Paul Craven reports on why this disaster has been lost to history and how Liverpool is planning to remember those who died.
It is the biggest single disaster in British maritime history.
We cannot allow the Lancastria to be forgotten. We owe it to the people who died on the day, and we also owe it to the survivors.
Three generations of the same family remember a sailor who experienced Britain's worst seagoing disaster. His son, John, now aged 83.
Came home and ran my overcoat.
His grandson, Paul. And his great-grandson, Daniel.
My great-grandfather's career started in 1927, where he began as a trimmer on board the ships, making sure the lumps of coal were the correct size to fit into the furnaces. And then in 1932, he was promoted to a greaser. I think the fact that he ultimately got that promotion meant he was above decks, and that's what probably saved his life on the day. So look at these, Halifax and New York.
Yeah.
New York, Montreal.
And then there's some that simply just say round the world as well.
Yeah.
The family from Ormskirk know that Patrick rarely talked about his terrible experience at sea, and now they want to find out more. Patrick was 34 when the Second World War broke out, but he'd been working around the docks of Liverpool and serving in the Merchant Navy since leaving school. He travelled the world, and in 1939 he was signed up on the Liverpool-registered Cunard cruise liner Lancastria.
After the last holiday cruise, 450 passengers of the liner Lancastria get their biggest thrill of the trip when the ship goes aground in the Mersey on her way up to dock in Liverpool.
16,000 tons, nearly 600 feet long, and built to carry 2,000 passengers, the Lancastria was an elegant workhorse in the Cunard fleet. Tony Story was once the deputy editor of the Liverpool Echo and is now a maritime consultant. He's taken a keen interest in cruise liners and the wealth of information stored in the Cunard archive maintained at the University of Liverpool.
At the time, Cunard ships had names which ended in IA, such as Lancastria or Mauritania, Carpathia, and the White Star Line, which Cunard took over. The convention there was that ships had names ending in IC, the best and most famous example, of course, being Titanic. Lancastria is remembered as being a happy ship. To serve on the Atlantic for Cunard, of course, there was a degree of opulence. The lifestyle was quite grand for many guests travelling in first class. Fine restaurants, fine dining, a gymnasium, a lot of outdoor deck games, and was a powerful ship in terms of being able to cross the Atlantic, maintain a scheduled service from Liverpool to New York.
13 years ago, when Daniel was 10, he was set homework to find out what his family had done in World War II. He chose his great-grandfather, Patrick, the merchant seaman.
At first, I thought it would be quite an easy job to do. You know, kind of everything about the war seemed to be really well documented, and we were quite quickly surprised just how little information there was outside of our own family's sources.
There's the memorial plaque.
Initially, it was really difficult to find information on the Lancastria, because even 10, 12, 13 years ago, the internet was in its infancy. So it was looking through books and the start of the internet. That's what helped us.
It's a good number of survivors, but then if you look at the amount of people that potentially lost their lives, it's unbelievably high. It's almost like a town, near enough gone.
Through the web, the Fosters began to piece together what had happened to Patrick and the Lancastria in that summer of 1940.
Those who lost their lives.
What they discovered shocked them. How could a cruise liner built for 2,000 sink with losses of 6,000? And why wasn't it as well known as the Titanic disaster? The answers lay in the fog of war.
Without even bothering to declare war, the German armies launched a coordinated attack across the neutral borders of Luxembourg, Belgium and Holland.
As the British Army fled France as Hitler's blitzkrieg swept across Europe, they were rescued from the beaches of Dunkirk. It was a story retold countless times as the defeat turned into triumph by Churchill and an armada of small boats. What the British public wasn't told at the time was 200,000 more troops hadn't been rescued. They were rushing south to the port of Saint-Nazaire. And that's where the Fosters have come, to meet one man who knows more about the hidden history of the Lancastria than virtually anyone else.
Hello, my friend. How are you?
Good to see you.
Yves Beaujeu is a former trawlerman. His introduction to the Lancastria was ghastly. In the 1980s, his nets would capture human bones. He made it his duty to find out why.
Bonjour, hello, good morning.
Andrea. Donc là, nous sommes juste à l'endroit où
So this is exactly the place,
les
the dock,
paquebots-
where the little ships, where the
les
ships
bateaux
went out
arrivaient pour rejoindre
to
la place de
help
Lancastria.
to embark the troops on the Lancastria.
Like troops at Dunkirk 2 weeks earlier, those that reached Saint-Nazaire believed they were all but rescued. Cruise liners had been requisitioned as troop ships and stripped of all luxuries. Like the big ships at Dunkirk, they were now on a mercy mission to carry as many to safety as they could. The Lancastria lay 8 miles offshore because the estuary was too shallow. Now all that was left was for the passengers to be ferried to the liner. Yves is showing the Fosters where they got on the smaller vessels.
This warship would have been here.
Il était juste amarré le long du quai là-bas, là.
It was just on the other side of the bridge.
Do you think they fought or they argued to say, I want to go on the Lancastria, not on that ship?
Non, non, non,
No.
non, non.
They had no choice.
C'était aller le plus vite possible.
The only thing was to go as fast as possible.
The captain, Rudolph Sharp from Wallasey, started embarking passengers at 6 a.m. At 1 p.m, his staff stopped counting when they reached 6,000, but he allowed passengers to continue boarding. The ship was attacked by a German aircraft with 4 bombs at 3:45 in the afternoon. 1,500 tons of thick, glutinous oil poured into the sea and ignited in patches. Anyone in the water was covered in the slimy fuel. It went in their eyes and their lungs, and it was so slippy it made it difficult to haul survivors to safety. Patrick Foster swam for an hour before being rescued. 2,500 others were also saved.
It must have been indescribably horrible. You know, the sinking, from what we've read, appeared to happen quite quick after the ship had actually been hit. You have this image of every cabin, every staircase being full of people, almost not being able to move through the crowd. And of course, you know, when the ship begins to sink and you have that large mass of people so tightly packed, very difficult to get off the ship, certainly, you know, and it certainly explains why not all the lifeboats would have been deployed in time. When you factor in there was a lot of civilians on board the ship, women and children that he would have seen drowning and dying, it really does not bode well to actually think about what he would have seen that day.
I try and put myself in my granddad's shoes and to see what he was thinking. He was almost in a no-win situation. He either goes down with the ship or he jumps into what he knows is thick, crude oil. There was children in the sea, there was women in the sea. I'm sure there was a lot of survivor guilt in there.
The death toll is a matter of conjecture, but modern estimates put it between 4,000 and 6,000 souls. It was greater than the combined losses of the Titanic and Lusitania. The news was so bad, the government suppressed it. Prime Minister Churchill issued an order banning newspapers from publishing information, claiming it was in the national interest. It was American papers which printed the first details, and that was 6 weeks later.
It was one more bad news story in a sea of bad news. And I can understand that after the glory of the Dunkirk, the little ships, he was able to put a positive spin on that.
Out from the hell that is Dunkirk, aboard the transport the men are packed like sardines. But what does it matter? The tighter they're packed, the more they hold each other up. And so they step ashore back home, back to the battle for Britain.
If Churchill would have brought that up, the morale to the country would have been so damaging, we couldn't have taken it at that particular time in the war.
The story has really died before it's ever got a chance to be told. I think that's the main reason why it's largely been forgotten.
In his diaries, Churchill said he intended to release the news a few days later, but added,
"Events crowded upon us so black and so quickly that I forgot to lift the ban."
It's important that we remember just how much of the areas in the UK are affected by this. We tend to put a bit of a focus on it being like a Liverpool issue because of the crew, and that's where the ship was registered. And it's just vital that this is important to not just be a local issue, but also as an issue that's remembered nationwide and becomes part of the nation story in a way.
When you look at the headstones, you see RAF, Royal Army Ordnance Corps, Royal Engineers, Pioneer Corps, and unfortunately the graves are just next to each other. They all died on the same ship, doing the same thing, trying to get home. And there's no segregation in death, is there?
No.
It's just really so sad. And such a great loss, and affected so many different families throughout the time.
Where would you say the wreck is located?
Yeah, Lancastria, yeah.
One of the first bodies was washed on the shore on the 28th of June, 10 days later. And this was going to last for 6 months. Sometimes 20, 30, 35 bodies a day arrived at certain places. All along the French Atlantic coast there are 53 cemeteries with victims of the Lancastria. The last body was found at Bordeaux on the 17th of December, exactly 6 months after the tragedy.
It must have been so bad for them. It must have been an absolute nightmare. To find bodies washing up on the beaches, it just doesn't bear thinking about. We've learned to have a great respect for the people as Annecy, for the way they remember the people today and the way they dealt with them at the time of the incident.
The personal bravery of these people who then had to go to the beach, do the unfortunate task of identifying the bodies and then bury them amongst the many local cemeteries. It's something that certainly deserves our respect. They have certainly put themselves under a lot of emotional trauma going through all of that. And furthermore, I think as well, it would serve as a really, in a way, brutal and painful reminder of the occupation that had only really just begun.
It's difficult to estimate the scale of the disaster in terms of the loss because the numbers have never been formally confirmed, but it is accepted that more people perished that day than on the combined losses of the Lusitania or even the Titanic. And it is the biggest single disaster in British maritime history. This is an archived box of images of the interior of the Lancastria. There's the gymnasium, a cabin. June the 14th will mark the 80th anniversary of Lancastria departing Liverpool. It's an anniversary that's been marked in different ways over the years, but because it's the 80th anniversary, it's a significant anniversary. There will be a public service at Our Lady in St Nicholas, the Sailors' Church at Pierhead.
So we'll go see Father Crispin.
Okay.
And see if he's been able to advance the service anymore.
Well, we're just next to the river here. The docks were literally across the road, and when ships such as the Lancastria came in, sailors would come and offer a devotion to St Nicholas when they went on their journeys and when they came back as well.
The Fosters, alongside the City Council and Cunard, have been the driving force in organising a public memorial to all the victims and survivors of the Lancastria tragedy. On the 14th of June, it'll be exactly 80 years since the ship left Liverpool for her final, doomed voyage.
We're going to have a lot of the choral music, we're going to have the traditional elements of a commemorative service, but I hope we can tell the story as well, the before, the during and the after story. And I think the more we can capture the human emotion involved in that, the better. So we want it to be not just an educational journey to find out this story that has never really been told, but we also want it to be an emotional journey.
We couldn't have done this without Father Crispin because of the people he knows and the associations he's got. And Cunard have helped us a lot as well, really. I just hope people realise they're more than welcome to come and remember and commemorate and, you know, just not forget the sinking of the Lancastria.
Imagine this happening in the modern world, it simply wouldn't be forgotten about. No matter what type of government notices were put on them, what type of censorship was put on, the story would always find a way to come through.
We cannot allow the Lancastria to be forgotten. We owe it to the people who died on the day, and we also owe it to the survivors.
And a reminder, if you want to go to the memorial service, it'll be at the Liverpool Parish Church on the 14th of June. Well, that's it for this week, but don't forget, if you've got a story, you can email us at insideoutnorthwest@bbc.co.uk. I'll be back next Monday. Goodbye.